this is a good idea. Heyo, I'm Rachel, this is Missy, we're Miss Daisy Sewing, and today we're going to go over something I mentioned in a previous video. And do not fret, the original dress will not go to waste. I will repurpose that fabric somewhere else, but that will be a video for another day. So the time has come and we are going to repurpose my original walkaway dress. It's a test to see how well it was assembled, I'll tell you that much, because I can't remember how far my sewing journey I was at the time. So the plan is we're going to take this, we're going to cut it apart, and I want to do a sort of harlequin diamond patchwork with it, with the blue and the white, and then I'm going to use that and make a sort of celestial blazer for my husband. I'm hoping it'll give more Howl's Moving Castle than a Joker. Or a Jester, I should say. But we'll wait and see, fingers are crossed. So let's just get on with it. So I've got the dress here. I have the original scraps from when I did this dress, because I hoard everything. And I also have the scraps from the new dress, but I would prefer to use, for cohesive sake, all of the same one. But first things first, I'm going to cut 2 copies of the lining, well, the outside of the lining, in the sort of grey fabric, and the plan is that I am going to flatline the patchwork onto the outside one of this, and that should hopefully keep it all together and in shape. We'll see.
I can confirm that this was better assembled than I had expected, so in the end I decided just to cut it straight away into strips and not worry about taking apart those side seams. They weren't salvageable anyway. I had already decided I wanted to have the facings in the dark blue, so I just went straight ahead and got those cut whilst I was at it.
So I'm using the 60-degree angle, and the plan is I just line that here. You can see I've got a 60-degree angle drawn there, and then I've drawn it 3 inches further down, which matches the width of the strip. And then if I just turn that upright like so, you can see that diamond shape, and it's quite a sizable diamond, but I do want quite big diamonds on this. It also feels the most economic use of the fabric. I've got a big bundle here, so the plan is I'm going to make strips and then draw on these 60-degree lines and then cut from there. You'll see what I mean. For anyone interested, this is all that remains of the original dress. I've cut up and organised the strips, and I'm just sort of getting them organised to start sewing together into blocks of 4, and then we'll start making the diamonds out of it.
The next step was to stitch together those stacks into blocks of 4, and then after that I decided to press them, which was actually the point where I realised that this project was going to take me a lot longer than I had originally anticipated, but I decided to persevere. Following that, I then had to cut those strips into blocks with that 60-degree angle, and those would make the foundation strips for my diamonds.
That's all the bits cut. I've got plenty of scraps left if I need to make more, but now the plan is to get these sort of roughly measured out into that sort of diamond print, into pieces that will cover each of the bits I need to cut, but like no more. I want to minimise the amount of wastage here. So yeah. So the plan here is to figure out roughly sort of what I'm going to need in terms of strips and things in order to cover each piece. And then the plan is going to be to try and minimize wastage. I'm just gonna just cover them is the idea, and then I will flatline them to these outside pieces. You can already see here the contrast. I think it's going to look really nice. So yeah, on to getting these figured out. Oh, one last thing. I want the diamonds sort of pointing up, so I'm paying attention to the grain lines on the pattern pieces. So the idea is going to be that I want the arrows, sort of the points going along with the arrow.
I neatly laid down my diamonds on top of the pattern pieces, and then realised once it came to sewing them together that I had absolutely wasted my time. I hadn't taken into account the seam allowance and that the diamonds would get smaller. The next step after that was then to press everything before I then got it flat lined, and I did this by pinning it and then stitching around the edge and then trimming it down. And this became my life for the next forever. Sewing, pressing, flatlining, and trimming.
A few moments later.
More assembling, more sewing, more flatlining, and more trimming.
One eternity later.
That's all of my checker pieces. There's quite a lot. And then I've got over there all of the lining and the sort of pocket pieces and things. But we're finally over this hurdle, and guys, it has taken ages. I completely underestimated how long the patchwork was going to take. But I do think it's going to be worth the effort. So let's get onto that lining, I suppose. If anyone's after a sort of how-to on following a pattern, let me know. But I'm just going to quickly go over the highlights. This one has a couple of interesting pieces. So like there's actually a cut in the front here, and then a little dart above hand, which we can see in the pattern piece reflected here. So this is that cut, and this is that dart. So I'm going to quickly draft all of that kind of stuff onto these pieces and get them finished up before we can start assembly. So I thought this would be fun to show. That slit that I had to cut in with that dart is actually where the pocket is going to go. So, and I need to add the welt to that. I hate welted pockets. So that will be getting done off camera. They are like my arch nemesis. But we'll hopefully get it looking nice, and I'll update you when that's done.
Now that I had an idea of exactly how much scrap I had left, I cut out all of the pockets and the flaps out of the dark blue fabric because I wanted the higher contrast. Following that, I did the sewing of the pocket off camera, as I said earlier, and I was really happy with how these came out. The pocket's really nice and big, the flap sits nicely, and the little welted pocket on top is nice and neat too. I repeated the process on the other pocket, and then this was the moment when I could see the vision coming to life. It felt much more Hal's Moving Castle than Court Jester, so I was happy. I then hit my sewing groove and completely forgot to film the majority of the next steps.
So I still need to put the collar on, but I like to save that for the end. But that's the outside of the jacket done. It's got the nice big pockets here, and then I've got a little front pocket here. Next step is the lining. Whilst the lining is much the same as the exterior, the front lining is a little bit different in that we actually have some contrasting fabric on the inside, so when the collar turns over, this would be what you see, which is quite fun, but it does give you some quite weird little shapes. So my first step is going to be to sew along here and here on both of these, and then I'll pop in the welted pocket on the inside pocket on one of these. So that's the front lining done, and we've got our pocket included. I still need a little bit of sewing to do. The side seams need to go on, and I also have to attach the sleeves, but the lining is coming together nice and quickly. The front bit, which is blue there, will actually be the part of the jacket you see on the lapel, and it's actually quite clever the way that works. But yeah, let's finish up getting this lining sewed. So that's the lining done. Just show off on the inside. It's got a nice little pocket there. And as you can see, that's that blue bit, which will match up to the lapel when the lapel's open. I think it sort of helps sort of tone it down a little bit, having the lapels being blue. So next step is going to be putting the collar on and attaching the lining to the actual coat. I end up doing a lot of that by hand, particularly like with the cuffs here, just because I find I get a neater finish. So we'll see how much I can get done on the machine, and then we'll get onto the hand sewing. So I've got the collar on, that's it there. And what we're going to do is sew sort of part of the way from here around, up around the collar and down that same side, and then we'll flip it right sides out, and that'll actually be quite a decent chunk of the sewing done. I probably will top stitch just to get everything nice and neat, but we'll sort of have a look at how it looks at the end. But this is definitely the ugly sins part of the project.
Whilst it's quite tedious owing to the weight of the coat, I do enjoy this part of the process. You've got to take your time and make sure that all of your corners are snipped, and particularly with the collar, that we've cut into those little corners and folds. And then the moment of magic is when you flip it right sides out. Owing to the size of this coat, that was a little bit of a fight, but I was really happy with it once I got all of the seams lined up and everything was sitting nice and straight, which meant that the next step I was going to do would be the top stitching.
So that's the top stitching on, and it's all just sitting a little bit neater now, and yeah, really pleased with that. So the next stop is going to be buttonholes, and then popping the buttons on, and it's technically done.
I decided to keep it classic and stick with a gold button, and I am really pleased with how this came out. Are the diamonds perfect? No, but no one's going to look that closely, and for my first attempt at something on this scale, I am so happy with it. But now, it's time for the ball. We had an absolutely delightful time at the ball, and whilst we were technically matchy-matchy, I do feel like our outfits were different enough that it wasn't cringy. In part because it's got such a bold print, and also with that white colour, it really stood out, and that was also a really nice element with this coat. As an aside, I was also really pleased with how my wraparound dress was received. I got loads of compliments on it, particularly the pointy hat. Overall, really pleased with how this coat came out. My husband said he felt really cool in it, and I don't really think I can get a higher compliment than that. So until next time, cheerio!